Today, we're going to tackle a really big and honestly often misunderstood idea: structural racism. We're going to explore how racism can be so much more than just personal prejudice, how it can actually be a whole invisible system. All right, let's get into it.
So let's just jump right to the heart of the matter. When you hear the word racism, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's a hateful comment or maybe a single biased act. But is that all there is to it? Or could there be something much bigger, something less obvious at play? That's the real question we're unpacking.
And here's our game plan for how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the invisible system itself. Then, we'll see how it pops up in our daily lives. After that, we'll explore the power of stories or narratives in keeping it all going. And finally, we'll talk about how to shift our thinking from blame to responsibility.
Okay, first up, the invisible system. This is all about getting our heads around how racism can work on a massive scale, even without a single person acting like a villain.
So what are we really talking about here? Well, structural racism isn't about individual hate. It's about the systems themselves, the built-in rules, the everyday routines, the way our institutions just operate. Think schools, companies, the justice system. It's how they can end up producing unequal outcomes over and over, sometimes without anyone even realizing it. And here's where it gets kind of tricky and really interesting. You'd think an idea like being colorblind would be a good thing, right? I don't see race. But the thing is, this approach can actually hide the real inequalities that exist. If you refuse to see race, you can't see the patterns of racial disadvantage. It makes the existing privileges seem normal, just the way things are. Think of it like this. On one side, you have that overt racism. The insults, the violence, it's ugly, it's loud, and it's pretty easy to spot. But on the other side, you have structural racism. It's quiet. It's embedded in the fine print of institutional rules and the "this is how we've always done it" routines. Much harder to see, but just as powerful.
Okay, so this all sounds a bit abstract, I know. Invisible systems, institutional routines. What does that actually look like in the real world? Well, that's what this next section is all about, seeing where the system becomes visible in our daily lives. Let's start with education. We're always told it's the great equalizer, the one place where everyone gets a fair shot based on merit. But what if the system itself has a thumb on the scale?
So, how does this actually play out? Well, research has found that even with the exact same grades, racialized students often get fewer recommendations for gifted or advanced high school programs. And it's not just that. Think about what's being taught. When textbooks are full of stereotypes, when a colonial point of view is presented as the only one, and when stories of resistance are pushed to the footnotes, that's the system at work. Now, from the classroom, let's head to the job market. We all love the idea of a meritocracy, right? The best, most qualified person gets the job. Simple. But the data shows it's not quite that simple.
I mean, this is wild. Study after study has shown this. You sent out identical resumes, but just change the name to something that sounds less German, and boom, significantly fewer callbacks. Qualifications for migrants are often looked at with more suspicion, and all of this pushes entire groups of people toward jobs that are less secure and pay less. That's not just bad luck, that's a pattern.
All right, now we need to talk about a really tough, but absolutely crucial area: policing and the justice system. For many people, the state means protection, but for others, it can be a source of constant fear and anxiety. And racial profiling is a textbook example of this system in action. We're talking about police stopping someone based on how they look, not on any actual suspicion of a crime. When this happens over and over, it leads to the systematic criminalization of entire communities. It becomes a routine, an institutional practice. So you gotta ask, right? How does this stuff keep going, year after year, decade after decade? Why don't these systems just fix themselves? Well, a huge part of the answer lies in the stories we tell. And that brings us to the power of narrative. Think about it. The media, the language we use every day, they don't just reflect reality, they actively shape it. They frame who we see as normal and who we see as other or even dangerous. Using a phrase like refugee wave, for example, turns human beings into a faceless natural disaster. That language does real work in defending a system of exclusion. There's this incredible quote from Malcolm X that just nails it. He said, "Racism is like a Cadillac. They bring out a new model every year." It's this powerful idea that racism adapts. It doesn't stay the same. As the old, obvious forms become socially unacceptable, new, more subtle, more systemic models just roll off the assembly line.
And one of the main ways the system protects itself is by using the isolated incident defense. We hear it all the time, right? Oh, that was just one bad apple. But when you see the same one bad apple story again and again and again in different cities, in different companies, in different schools, it stops looking like a random exception. It starts looking like a predictable pattern, a structural problem.
So, if we accept that this is a structural problem, not just a few bad people, that can feel pretty overwhelming. But it also points us toward a path forward. And that brings us to our final section, moving away from blame and toward shared responsibility. Now, this is probably the most important point of all. Talking about structural racism is not about pointing fingers and making individuals feel guilty. It's about looking honestly at the systems we all participate in and asking, how can we, together, make this fairer? It's a shift from individual blame to collective responsibility.
So, what does that path look like in practice? Well, it's not just one magic bullet. It means real institutional reforms, literally changing the rules of the game. It means meaningful anti-racist education, so we all share a better understanding. It means being brave enough to critique existing power structures. And maybe most crucially, it means genuine participation, making sure the voices of those most affected are not just heard, but are central to creating the solutions.
You know, when you get right down to it, this isn't some side issue. Tackling structural racism is a fundamental test of a democracy's credibility. Can a society that says it believes in equality for all really stand by that promise if it's not willing to look at its own foundations and do the hard work of change? So, if you take one thing away from our time together today, let it be this. Racism is not just a series of isolated incidents. It is a system. And understanding that system, really seeing it, is the first, most essential step toward changing it. Thanks for digging into this with me.